This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with this is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Yeah, hi.
What are we talking about today, Puka?
We are going to be discussing the mists and enchantment. Everything about them. Every
Yes.
last blessed thing from start to finish. Every edition. No, not really.
Wait.
But yeah, a wide-ranging discussion on two topics which I guess are maybe not the most difficult for Changeling players and STs to get their heads around, but difficult to kind of operationalize in a game, I would say.
I don't think people realize how difficult they are.
Yeah.
And I think they actually go against a lot of core assumptions people have about how role-playing games work. Especially the mists.
What are the mists, Josh? Let's start with that simple question.
I'm trying to remember. So the mists
Ironic.
Yes. The mists, what are they metaphysically?
Yeah.
That appears to be one of those vague things that they've kept deliberately vague across editions, but kind of some sort of mechanism for the dreaming to protect itself, I would say.
So I wanted to ask, you have more experience, I think, with Dark Ages Fae than I do, which is
Yeah.
essentially zero. I have read the book.
They have a thing called mists.
Yes.
They are not the same.
I want to give a shout out to Jacob Kunder's World of Dark Ages podcast because I recently had occasion to listen to the Dark Ages Fae episode, and they discussed it in there, and there was reference to the mists in that game being more like the, I guess, chaotic force of creation, like the original, not nothingness, but abstractness
Yeah.
from which reality formed.
I'd say mix that with paradox and
I like that as an element that I would want to kind of incorporate into my idea of what the mists are in Changeling. Not entirely like that, but historically or whatever within the context of the game. I think I've spoken before about my theory about there being multiple shatterings, and I could see that being a metaphysical representation of the mists in the distant past, which some changelings might vaguely remember.
Yeah, you could even say the shattering is inherently the creation of the mists. Or the sundering even. But like it's sort of integral to the separation of the dreaming and glamour from physical stuff, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, regardless of what they were or might have been in the past, by second edition and modern times, second edition actually refers to them directly as a side effect of banality and says they're the result of ancient protections of the Fae to hide themselves, mixing with banality. And then C20 kind of expands on that, saying it was a process that occurred over time. So it started as those ancient protections that slowly got more and more diluted, I guess, with banality.
And in C20, and sort of suggested in previous editions, it's also what it means to not interact with chimerical reality. Like, if there's a chimera in the room and you're an unenchanted mortal and you don't see it, that's because of the mists.
Somehow, yes.
Yes. But it's different from the memory effect, at least.
Is it though?
Like, it might be the same mists. Well, okay, it's mechanically different from the memory. But that ties into enchantment, I guess, because enchantment's almost like getting rid of the mists temporarily.
Yeah, and to some extent, I almost wonder if, like, if we think of chimera and chimerical things and glamour as kind of having repercussions in the mortal world, and the mists are kind of what push back against that. I'm not a physicist, so I'm not going to start dropping things like, for every action, there's an equal and opposite banal reaction. But that kind of,
yeah.
It's the byproduct of a reaction between Fae stuff rooted in the dreaming and meat stuff rooted in the autumn.
Yeah, I really do see it as a protection mechanism of the dreaming. Its various manifestations and effects. Like, the idea would be banality started encroaching. This was killing glamour. So the dreaming protects itself, being a thing of glamour, or the thing of glamour, or what is the dreaming's another question.
It's the dreaming's histamine.
Yeah.
or some other immune system thing. So,
And sometimes there's autoimmune effects, and
yeah.
well, that'd be cool. Actually, interesting other flaws, because there's flaws like slipped seaming and stuff, where
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
parted mists, where it's like not effective. That'd be interesting, having like the mists being too strong.
It's
Anyway,
also, have you ever seen or run the mists as sentient in some way or semi-sentient? Because I like the dreaming as being a vaguely sentient force,
yeah,
but not the mists per
I
se.
treat the mists not as sentient as I treat it as like a knee jerk reaction kind of thing, like
Mhm.
a impulse,
Okay.
even more so than the dreaming. Like glamour and the dreaming are more like unconsciousness, and the mists I guess would count as unconscious, but it's like very reflexive.
An immune response.
Yeah, but it could also be like I guess banality is also kind of like that too when you think about it. But it's
Yeah. The autumn world's immune response.
yeah.
Ultimately, I don't think they should be malevolent, certainly, because even though they do sometimes have detrimental effects to changelings, they
Hmm.
don't really seem harmful, or at least the mists overall, I think, help the Fae more than they harm them.
In a sense, but I mean also that's what the forgetting is, and that's what in a way it's very harmful. Or
Yeah,
maybe it's preventing a greater harm.
it prevents bedlam at least.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of glamorous based things, what is enchantment?
Enchantment is parting of the mists in a sense. It's becoming awakened to the Fey world. It's in a sense what all the changelings are when you're playing a changeling. You're kind of enchanted all the time, but that's not how it describes it. It's making mortals and whatnot like the Fey temporarily, I guess, with glamour.
Yeah.
Not in terms of powers or anything, but just being aware of Chimera, being aware of Fey mains, being aware of all that stuff, and removing any memories from that might have been gone from the mists. So, like any lost memories, bringing back memories. Yeah.
I'm going to play fast and loose with the scientific metaphors again for a minute, having no background in any of it, and say that it's like a temporary electric charge that's sensitive to the dreaming's magnetism or something.
Okay.
I don't know if that works, but yeah, that it allows mortals or the otherwise unglamorous to have a sensitivity to and perception of the dreaming for an amount of time.
Yeah. Which also has drawbacks for them because now they can be hurt by
Yeah.
the dreaming in ways they couldn't before.
I do want to say though, I know we're trying to be a little bit edition agnostic at this point, but with C20, particularly with the ritual of the parted mists, there's this veneer about somehow enchantment, from my perspective, fundamentally changing who the person is. And that's
Yeah.
most visible with something like bestowments,
Hmm.
but it feels a little bit more in the soul or deeper metaphysical somehow than it did in first and second edition, where it was
Yeah.
just like you open their eyes for a bit.
I mean, there was the whole dream struck state.
Yes, I have that on my notes as well.
So it had a long term. You could argue if that's the enchantment specifically, or just the glamour of the enchantment being too strong for too long, or if, even if there's a difference. But
Bedlam for mortals.
kind of, yeah.
I am curious why they brought bestowments in the first place. I guess because the Kinane got so oomphed up, they wanted to make playing an enchanted mortal more appealing, so they repurposed the gifts and bumped it down a peg.
They also made enchantment so much harder too,
Well, yeah.
which is I don't understand some of this. I don't think either of us use this in our games,
No.
our own personal games. Like we don't really use the C20. I use a lot of C20. I don't use that.
Well, what bothers me about it too is from a story perspective, at the story level, it to me fundamentally changes the tone of Mortals in the Dreaming from being like wide eyed, dream struck visitors
Hmm.
to being these unique creatures with unprecedented, quirky powers. And I don't really know how I feel
Hmm.
about that.
Well, that's the parted mist one, but that's
Oh,
it's
yeah,
so
yeah, no.
temporary. The parted mist doesn't last that long, and then you can never do it again. So it's like what?
Well, it lasts a while if you just try not to spend your glamour.
Yes, yeah, but you stay enchanted, and then you become unenchanted, and you'll never have parted mists again, or really
Yeah,
never enchanted at all again.
yeah. That kind of special powers piece and the ritual and everything, that feels to me a lot more in line with modern fantasy tropes than the traditional lore stuff. And I think that's part of why it's not that it rubs me the wrong way, it's just it's a change in tone that isn't made explicit
Yeah.
and it bothers me that it's not. That being said, I guess there's like true Thomas and exceptions that prove the rule.
Well, I mean, if we want to go through the edition stuff, like first edition, enchantment was described as a weapon essentially. There wasn't invoking the weird or
Yeah.
Dolorous Blow or any of that. There was you can enchant a mortal like violently sometimes, and then that's how you can interact with them if it's not going to be pleasant. It doesn't have to be violent, but that was one that if you were to do violence to a mortal, that is how you do it.
Or ravage them.
Yeah, or ravish them, I suppose. Yeah, and then second edition was more sort of in betweenish, and then third edition is just so difficult to enchant that.
Well, let's talk about the mechanics for a minute. Um,
Yeah.
so, for anyone who hasn't read second edition, it's very simple. You infuse X glamour into a token and give it to a mortal, and they will be enchanted for X days. Alternatively, the forced enchantment, you spend a single point of glamour, roll glamour with a difficulty of the target's banality, which is increased by 1 if they have cold iron on them, and that just blanket enchants them for like a scene, an hour, however long it serves the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the C20 version.
Yeah.
I think this formula is correct. For temporary enchantment, you spend the target's banality plus X glamour to enchant them for X plus 1 days. So if they have a banality 4 or 5, which is like standard for a quirky mortal, and you spend, well, okay, if they have banality 4, you spend 5 glamour, you enchant them for 2 days, which is a lot of glamour to spend for not that long. It
Mm-hmm.
seems punishingly expensive. And then there's the Ritual of the Parted Mists, which I think it's 20 glamour, with one person as the benefactor leading the ritual because you have to get multiple changelings to participate. The enchantee gets 6 points of glamour and possibly a quirky power or two, but as soon as that glamour is spent, they are no longer enchantable ever again.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of work and risk for very little payoff. And if you fail the roll to enchant them, you lose all the glamour and everybody gains a dot of banality.
Mm-hmm.
It's unclear to me in C20 actually if you have a lasting enchantment on a mortal, can they actually get additional glamour, or is it like they start with 6 and it just slowly ratchets down and that's it forever?
It suggested it was ratchets down for that's it forever. Is the way I
Yeah.
read it too. If it was intended otherwise, I think it missed the bit saying it was intended otherwise.
Yes.
So. Oh, it's also stamina plus Greymare roll for the lasting enchantment.
Right. Yeah.
Which is
That's the
just
other thing. It's like, okay, lift those 3 dice and let me know how it goes.
yeah. I always find amusing attribute ability combinations hilarious. So.
Yeah. What about the mists mechanics too?
Oh, you have to spend a dot of willpower? Anyway, the mist
Yeah. Yeah.
mechanics.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
mists mechanics in previous editions and in C20, I can't even say they've changed. It's more like C20 actually defined them better, I think.
Well, but bear in mind also C20 borrows it more or less wholesale from Dreams and Nightmares.
Yes.
So,
Did Dreams and Nightmares have as much detail on the effects on mortals with mists?
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, mists can actually affect. Actually, thinking of the dreaming, mists do affect changelings as well. But from
Which 99% of Changeling players and STs forget, I think.
yeah, well, there's two ways it can. There's when your banality gets. Does it still have it in C20 when your banality is higher than your glamour? You can start to suffer from the mists, like your permanent
Ooh,
banality.
that's when you enter my favorite term, the retrourse.
Yes, which can lead to something that is not named, as far as I can tell, in C20. Although I've heard claims otherwise, I couldn't find it. Of the forgetting,
Hmm.
where you just you forget for a while who you are as a changeling, and maybe you'll never remember again. But in theory, you could.
There's a list, I think again it's in Dreams and Nightmares, but I'm not sure if it's in C20 where they give kind of a few examples and they say like blackouts, memory lapses, things like that.
Yeah, no, they do have that here.
Okay.
And yeah, so what happens is it's not just losing memory. Let's go for mortals. It's simpler.
Yeah.
So if your banality is incredibly low, okay, if your somehow banality is 0, which it can't be, you're essentially remember as well as if you're enchanted. But for actual mortals, it ranges from basically normal memories. So I guess 0 you remember better than not being enchanted. Okay, than you would other normal things.
I guess if you're a chimera, you can have banality 0.
Yeah, but then you're not immortal anyway. Um, as your banality goes up, you're remembering less and less. After a while, it starts getting like fuzzy. It's like you're waking from a dream after a certain point. but then you start treating it like a dream after a certain point, where even physical evidence you'll like, well, that's ridiculous. And at like banality 9, you'll basically respond poorly to even people suggesting it happened. So
Yeah. Well, wait, which chart are you looking at when you're talking about this?
effects on mortals on
Okay.
page 270 of Changeling the Dreaming 20th edition
Right. Okay.
book.
One of the things that bugs me about this chart is there's the duration column, which is like a
Yeah.
completely unrelated.
Like it's tied to your banality, but it's how long, what, you're unconscious or something after chimerical death?
Yeah, after you are chimerically slain or incapacitated. I think it's
Yeah.
incapacitated in 2e and then just like slain, and how long you have to wait before glamour can be used to reawaken you.
Oh yeah, in C20 it's how long until you can be brought back again
Right.
after chimerical death. It's not in second edition it's how long you're unconscious for. That one I'm leaning more to liking C20 more because it's like, oh, you're in a coma for 4 months.
Well,
That'd be great.
that's when you come out of the dreaming, I think.
Oh, okay. Wait, I thought that was a second chart.
Yeah, see, there's multiple charts that have different things as well, which is not helpful. The entering and leaving charts, I think, are actually well. No, before I get to that,
Yeah, they're in a separate They're in a separate book.
yeah, yeah.
Well, separate section chapter entirely. But anyway, let's just this changeling. It happens with the dreaming. I think the dreaming question, it affects changelings too. There's math involved.
On page 269, there's actually a note that I don't think I realized was there until I was looking through this, but it says, the more banality points a changeling has, the more the mists touch her in her day to day life. The presence of other
Mm-hmm.
Kithane helps to ameliorate this effect, allowing the character to recall as though she were 2 steps lower on the mist chart during any scene in which other changelings are present. So it says memories of glamour and the chimerical. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is the implication there that this is all the time any changeling, if they're like hanging out trying to remember what happened in the freehold last night and they have banality 4, it's uncertain?
Given the rest of the book, I don't think
I
so.
don't think so either,
But
but that's what it says.
that's why you could read that part. Yeah,
Yeah,
the layout of where things are, and this is not a knock on C20 specifically. This is because it's not like C20 was the first book to have this problem. But
for sure.
yeah,
It goes a long way to explaining why changelings hang out together so much, though, if that knocks them
yeah.
down 2 steps on the chart. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the entering and leaving the dreaming, though, I find more important to point out just because there's so many games where people are like, oh, let's go into the dreaming without thinking about the
Mm-hmm.
consequences of what happens to the memory. And I mean, yes, obviously all of this is probably the hand waviest part of the game. You know, if it serves the story to have the characters remember, they remember. But going by the mechanics here, you really shouldn't remember that much when you come back out of the dreaming. So, like, for example, I did a couple number crunches. If you have Glamour 6, Banality 3, which is not unreasonable for a starting character,
Mm-hmm.
then when you enter the dreaming, for a week, you will be confused. And I don't really like the use of the adjective confused there because it doesn't exactly match what it describes. And then when you return from the dreaming, the memories you formed there will immediately begin fading into like dream memories. That's how
Yep.
hard they'll be to remember. And that actually seems pretty reasonable to me. As an alternative, if you have Glamour 5, Banality 4, you'll be awestruck when you enter the dreaming for a month. And upon leaving, all you can remember is like who you were with. Whether or not you agree with those levels of impact, going by the mechanics, the rules as written, that's how
So
it works.
this I think ties into. I don't know. Do we want to get more deep into the mechanics here, or because I think there's a how do you play this aspect that's
I do want to get into the mechanics a little bit
okay. Let's get into mechanics. Sorry,
more.
cut that down. Yeah.
Um,
So yeah.
a couple other bits to point out. There are notes in both second edition and C20 where it says Glamour 1 is where most enchanted mortals are at when they're brought into the dreaming. So I suppose the implication there is the preliminary chunk of glamour that you spend kind of
Mm-hmm.
nullifies the banality that's in them. And then you put 1 point of glamour on top of that to formally enchant them. With the old
Hmm.
enchantment system, I guess you just didn't count the mortal's permanent banality rating when they entered or something. So it's unclear exactly why that's the case, but that's what it says. And I was also thinking about the Samhain mists, which we're told everybody kind of gets more in touch with their fey nature and then remembers almost nothing the next morning. But I don't think we ever get solid mechanics for moments like that.
No. Unless you're using certain arts to avoid it.
Yes. But I wish there was something like just a statement: everyone's banality is 3 lower during the night and 3 higher at the end, or something,
Yeah.
just to kind of mechanize that.
Use the
Easier.
mists as if it was X if you're Seelie and Y if you're unseelie. Whatever.
Yeah. There is also the question of how this applies to prodigals versus changelings or mortals. I do like the multipliers idea that we've seen in other books, although maybe kicking the wheels of those mechanics might be an idea.
Yeah. I don't personally like the multipliers. I like it like treat them like mortals.
Hmm.
Although they might have their own methods of essentially doing enchantment, but
Not to toot my own horn, but in the Storyteller's Vault supplement Fairy Faith, there's an additional option for mages. So,
yes.
but for the mists, I think that if you're running, for example, like a cross-splat game, I like leaning into the idea of the supernaturals kind of forgetting exactly what the changeling is.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this weird mortal ally who they know has some kind of power they can't quite remember until the Fae needs them to. And I like that dynamic as an option for their interactions.
I think going that person's a changeling, they're one of the Fae,
Mm.
and then you're blanking on anything
Yeah, yeah,
else.
that's fair.
But
Like I know there's something about you and it's Fae, but I don't know what that means.
yeah, the other books say like, yeah, they believe in even the technocracy talks about like changelings, sort of. So like they know there's something there. If a changeling tells you things, unless your banality is really high, you can choose to believe it or not. That's not really covered much by the mists.
Yeah. And when I say I like the multipliers, I really only like it in the service of, well, and the multipliers don't even really work in the C20 system, but just for the sake of crossover games, it makes it easier to, you don't have to keep dumping Glamour in.
Well, that gets to how to deal with the mists in your game,
Mm.
not just mechanically. And this is one of those like, okay, you actually need to talk to your players before you start, like session zero, kind of before session zero. Like this is the kind of thing that somebody might say they just can't, they do not want to have in their role playing when they're playing, and you might either have to completely. You're basically either going to have to play Changeling very differently from how it's written, or not play Changeling with them, and that's just kind of how it works. Because the mists, I mean, if you're playing a crossover and they're not one of the Fae, then it'll come up a lot more. But even if you're like by the book, core Kith, whatever Changeling, at some point in a long enough running chronicle, it's likely you'll have to roleplay your character going through the mists.
Yeah.
And people have to be ready for that. And it's one of those you're thinking it's a separation of your character and the player, and it's
Hmm.
requiring a certain amount of responsive, like not only I mean you have to you have buy-in from them, and it's not simple because it's like how do I I mean I think the chart helps a lot in the mists chart, the various mist charts describing what you remember, but it's still like translating that moment to moment in terms of what you're actually remembering and how you're actually going to play your character could be a little bit tricky at times. So
Hmm.
the players have to be up for that. And crossover just makes it more so. There's ways around it, maybe depending on the rules. Like sometimes being kinane would help, maybe depending on the edition and which game you're using, or just there's being permanent enchanted all the time, or using some other your own powers, or there's just playing very low banality characters.
Yeah.
If you're like, I ran a game where one of the PCs was a son of ether. I can't remember if her permanent banality was 2 or 3. So like, and she role played that. We went through like what that meant and all that, and yeah, she just played that, and then the mists weren't that big a deal. So she remember forget a few things, but
Yeah.
and occasionally was enchanted. But
It also depends which kind of splats you're crossing over with, because obviously someone like a mage with mind magic, and we'll get to that later, will have an easier time navigating it than, Joe Werewolf. So
mhm.
probably, I'm sure Joe Werewolf has their share of
Yeah, there's got
gifts
to
or
be some
whatever.
sort of gift
Um,
there that does something.
but I think what you're saying about the player and character bleed is really important here, because there isn't a lot of guidance on that, in particular around the topic of the mists or enchantment in the game.
Hmm.
And it's important to bear in mind if your non-Fey character goes into the dreaming, they will remember even less than the Fey characters when they come out.
Yeah.
But that being said, interacting with the chimerical world while still in the autumn world is not the same thing as going into the dreaming. And that's a lot easier to not only deal with, but actually make into part of the story because, suddenly all of the
Yeah.
non-Fey characters become kind of forgetful about this. And the Fae is like, oh my gosh, you guys, I told you this already. We went to the court last week. Like you said, the players need to be okay with that kind of role playing, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it adds an element of quirkiness.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're playing, I don't know, you're trying to do crossover and you're like a banality 8
Oh,
somebody, and
well, a
it's like,
technocracy game, yeah.
yeah, well, like, it doesn't have to be technocracy. I do think, like, later on they talk about banality ratings of various prodigals, and to me those are very much just stereotypes or just generalizations.
Well, they have to be. I mean,
Yeah,
people
but
by
I
the
mean,
book.
keep that in mind. I've heard people argue otherwise. Like, I think it's very much, there's a chart at one point talks about like what the personality is like for each level of banality. Look at that for your character, and I wouldn't track temp banality for even a PC if you weren't Fey at all. But
Yeah.
partly because there's no system for it, maybe you could make one. Look at what your personality is, and if your personality is changing over time, maybe adjust the permanent banality, and then use that for the mists.
It is one of those things where I feel like tables often fall into the trap of thinking that because they need to rework a system in order to make it work better for their game, then the system must be in some fundamental way broken, which I think is a failure to understand that it may work for plenty of other tables. I mean, as
Yeah,
someone myself, I don't tend to run crossover games, and generally, I'm fine with having the
yeah.
Elder Vampire be Banality 8.
I mean, I'm fine with 99% of Elder Vampires being banality. Not that you're going to have PC Elder Vampires in your Changeling game. That's gotten very strange,
Oh,
though. But
I've seen things.
yeah, but I think you could have a Elder Vampire that's not there. I think you can have like banality 1 technocrats.
They are absolutely the exception that proves the rule, though.
Yeah, they are not going to be liked out in the field.
No,
Um, they're going to have to be very good at doing things for the technocracy to tolerate them, and they are not going to rise up far in the ranks.
yeah,
I think that's also true of low banality 1 hermetic, though. Like,
yeah.
there's certain systems that just don't interact well with low banality.
But regardless, I think it offers opportunities for the players to deepen their role playing if they're able to keep in mind their character's relationship to the dreaming in terms of
Hmm.
memory. To be frank, I don't think Changeling's own authors they allied that piece more often than is helpful,
Yeah, I'm just saying. I think based on the rules, I don't. In this regard, I don't think crossovers actually as hard.
as it
Like,
seems.
the rules are not as directed to cross. They're not.
No, no,
I
no.
think the rules are compatible with crossover. Is probably
Mhm.
how I put it. But you might need to flesh things out a bit that are just not defined.
Or hand wave it.
Yeah, which you have to do anyway when you're running a game of Changeling, if it's purely Changeling, because there's things that'll happen that are just not covered in this book or any of these books. So,
There's a quote in the second edition core book that's used as an epigraph for the section talking about the mists from the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which goes like this.
mhm.
A man breaking his journey between one place and another at a third place of no name, character, population, or significance sees a unicorn cross his path and disappear. That in itself is startling, but there are precedents for mystical encounters of various kinds, or to be less extreme, a choice of persuasions to put it down to fancy until, my God, says the second man, I must be dreaming. I thought I saw a unicorn. And something that illustrates to me, first, is that the mists breed uncertainty and second guessing,
Mhm.
possibly also relativity in that sort of Rashomon kind of way where people remember things slightly differently.
Yeah.
I have in my notes a paraphrase of the famous sort of truism: we remember things not as they were, but as we are. And I think that kind of works. But in the moment, I think it should be extremely disorienting for the characters in an emotional sense. Changelings, but then especially non changelings. Because it's that feeling of like, oh, I forget what I was about to say, or what did I come into this room to do? Amplified and tied directly into their very identity. If you're a storyteller, I understand why, for the ease of storytelling, you just want to have memories remain intact to make things flow, but that I think that cheapens the role of what the mists can be in the game. And I think it's a really important piece of the game to kind of attend to.
So that actually reminds me, there's this assumption I've had, and it's been in games I've played in, it's been in games I've run, but I'm not sure it's ever actually been stated in any edition. When do the memory effects of the mists kick in? Like the next scene, right at the exact moment the thing happens? Like,
You're talking about in the autumn world when encountering chimerical
yeah,
stuff, not returning from the dreaming.
yes,
Yeah. I would say immediately. I mean,
okay,
as the memory forms or doesn't form.
yeah. My assumption was always it was after the event happens. Like if there was a fight, like just and there's like arts getting thrown around or something like that
Yeah.
during the you're still in combat. I wouldn't say there's really many memory effects, but like right after the fight, they'd be like, "What just happened?"
You could probably argue the end of the scene when you think about
Hmm.
something like calling on the weird lasting for the scene. So as soon as the
Yeah,
scene ends, it is now complete, and that's where memory kicks in.
yeah, yeah. That's how I interpreted it, but I realized it doesn't actually say that anywhere. So,
Just as a sidebar to that, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I do sometimes think about the three components of memory as being kind of grounded in facts, in emotions, and in senses. So, in the sense of like, when you think about, what did you do last Tuesday? So you can think about the fact sense being like, oh, last Tuesday I got up at 8 o'clock. I went to work at 9 o'clock. I took lunch at 12 o'clock. Like those kind of almost like a
hmm.
diary list of things. The emotion is I struggled out of bed at 8 o'clock. I plodded to the job I hate at 9 o'clock. I was so excited to go get lunch at that place with the really good key lime pie at noon and see my friends,
Hmm.
whatever. And then sensory based, I remember the grit of the sand that I was rubbing from my eyes and the adrenaline rush when I almost got into a fender bender as I was driving to work, and then the taste of that key lime pie. And those components all form a holistic memory. So it's tough enough to keep all three of those in place over time. Memories degrade in one way or another. But then just imagine this disorientation of them falling out immediately and noticeably like that. At the end of the scene, suddenly all of that is pitted with holes. Normally, it takes a lot longer for memories to degrade that much, but then
Well, that gets into from also. I'm even less of a psychologist than you are, but
I don't know what basis we have for making these claims, but okay.
but my understanding of it too is like it's almost like the sensory part is not tied to the event at all. Like you bring it back. It's almost like you remembered the facts
Mm,
and the senses are stored, sensory things stored somewhere else.
yeah,
And then you connect them back together. But if the facts disrupted, you might bring in a wrong sensory piece or something.
yeah. The problem is with the connections rather than the things you're
Yeah.
trying to connect to. Yeah, I think that's.
Like it seems like the mists, yeah. The way they describe things are mostly the fact based
Mm,
things. Yeah, and it says like it actually even under hazy memory, it's like the sensations are there. Like maybe even at a high banality, you could have tasted a food while enchanted that you've never tasted before, and you might remember that later, but you don't remember when you did it or any context from it. You just be like, if you ate that thing again, you'd be like, huh, I've had that before. I wonder where. Yeah.
I would believe that someone has probably done research to establish the rate at which different parts of dreams along those three lines fade.
Yeah.
Like how quickly you lose the here's what I did in my dream part, how quickly you
Mm,
lose the here's what I saw and felt, and here's what my emotions were. And
yeah.
I would base it around that.
I think there may be a lot of actually creating your memory of the dreams while awake too. Not
Yeah,
entirely,
yeah.
but because memory I know is a lot of when you're remembering it, you're actually creating new experience by
Yeah,
remembering. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you might remember that recreation now, and that's how memories can be messed with.
Maybe in the post edit we can look up some handy tidbits and put
Yeah,
them in the show notes or something.
yeah. Oh, now I'm
Yeah.
like wondering. Oh, what could you use? Like, I remember there was stuff like there's therapy involved with
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
PTSD. It's like, could you use enchantment for that? Like in the same way they use like memory affecting drugs sometimes in experimental therapies.
Yeah. And there is also the difference in the effects of forming short-term memories and forming long-term memories and
Mm-hmm.
forming identities. So when I think about how the mists kind of apply to each of those, the short term is like, okay, you're using cantrips in front of mortals. What are they going to remember or not? The longer term is like, you're on a quest and you got to kind of keep multiple pieces in mind. And the identity
Mm-hmm.
part is just remembering that you're a changeling, vis a vis listener of the show, Charles Siegel,
Yep.
describing changeling as an Alzheimer's simulator, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And to your point about when do the mists kick in, we don't really get much in the way of explaining away what the non-enchanted are seeing or experiencing.
Yeah. Like to me, I just went with it doesn't affect working memory, I guess,
Yeah.
but it affects everything else.
I
Sorry.
think a really good way to play that up in a game would be to just have like a mortal recurring character who you have to interact with slightly differently each time because they're going to kind of remember a slightly different valence of their time with your motley
Mm-hmm.
every time. Or again, to go back to that sort of Rashomon method. I'm using Rashomon method here, even though this is kind of a not quite accurate summary of the story. But if you have multiple mortals with different banality ratings, remembering different versions of the same event or different
Mm-hmm.
things about the changelings who were there, that list of
Yeah.
effects in C20, page 270, is quite useful for that.
Yeah. And I mean, you could also, if you were thinking around Changeling in the other crossover sense, where it's NPC, if you're running a technocracy game and you want to introduce changelings as antagonists, you can do really scary things with the mists there. And
Yeah,
like, if you like work out, okay, what's everybody's banality? Just, I mean, maybe you determine it based because you know the player characters and like be like, okay, this is what you remember, and this is what you remember, this is what you remember, and it's all hazy. This other guy doesn't remember anything. And what just happened?
yeah.
Like,
In the longer term, I don't really know how to make it stick except to say, to just kind of remind people your adventures in the dreaming don't really stand out brilliantly in your mind once you get back. And I feel
mhm,
like that is kind of a blow to both the player and the character.
yep. But that gets funny. Like, if you gain a dot of, I don't know, academics while in the dreaming, and come back again, do you still have that dot of academics?
I think the easy way around that is to just say, don't spend XP in the dreaming.
Yeah. But like I could see arguments either way. Like maybe the identity's more durable than the
And part of the horror of the game is knowing that you should know what's happened to you or even who you are, but then those connections, like we said, are blocked and you don't know in the moment how to unblock them.
and you know it's going to happen to you. That's a great.
Yeah.
You can use the mist there. Like okay, there's like an NPC who's involved in a longer term chronicle. There's an NPC who's close to the player characters, but they've been falling to banality, and then they do. Yeah.
Going back to your comment about like a session zero, I think it's good, especially if you're working with first time players, if you are doing a series of questions or even a prelude as part of a character building exercise, and you just kind of pose the question to the players, when is a time that your character was really disoriented by the mists? And having them answer that, I think, is very instructive about who their character is,
Mhm.
especially if it's like a she, for example, because the she have so much more to hash out around this than a lot of the other kits with regards to memory and
Mhm.
identity.
Oh yeah, that whole other. I mean, there's also the past lives is really tying
Hmm.
into the mists too,
Yeah.
and we're also getting there's a thing too. Again, I don't know if C20 actually mentions this or not, or where it's mentioned in various editions, but there's hints that it's not just memories that are affected by the mists or perceptions, but like writing or
Well, so that I want to also ask in
yeah.
terms of solutions to kind of work with the mist. I mean, obviously, don't run your game in the dreaming. That's an easy way to avoid a lot of these
Hmm.
problems. Having a treasure to protect memory, another easy way to have
Hmm.
avoid these problems. With something like a dream journal, what's your take on using something like that or mechanizing something like that?
Um.
As soon as you get back from the dreaming, you start writing down, and even if it doesn't exactly make sense later, it may help you kind of reclaim more memory than your standard glamour and banality might allow.
Yeah, I think it should help, but not totally fix the problem. If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
I guess it's like using other games as a comparison. do you allow the mists to have elements of arcane or obfuscate kind of mixed in or not?
Yeah. I think it does. Certainly the hiding things. Like I
Hmm.
do think that's tying into like why you don't see chimera. And it also applies into like if I have someone who'd be very low banality, and this is a thing hinted at but not really given mechanics, maybe they might perceive chimera sometimes. And
Yeah.
that's a case of the mist slipping for them too. And the whole arcane, like you're less likely to notice things or pay attention to it or
Yeah. I will say the, I guess, intentional vagueness in some of the descriptions in the book allow for my preferred way to run the mists as a storyteller, which is to kind of honestly enforce them as often as possible, but clear them away when it serves the best interests of the story. Because
mm-hmm.
even fairly dull mortals with high banality, it says, will occasionally have feelings or flashes or glimpses of their
Yeah.
dreamlike memories. And when or how these occur are entirely left to storyteller fiat. So you might as well let them happen when it's the most appropriate to push the story forward and create
Mm-hmm.
tension or drama.
Which could be very bad for you. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
very
potentially
good or
can.
very bad, or somewhere in between.
Yeah, and I think you're also banality. It doesn't make sense that moment to moment anybody's banality is actually that number, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah, there's definitely times where somebody's effective banality will be lower than or higher than others, and it's just not worth mechanically tracking that. But don't go, okay, this is the number. That's what it always means. Exactly this. Like,
Yeah. And there's always going to be edge cases. I mean, aside from that one technocrat with banality one, we have references to things like what happens when you try to re-enchant undone changeling or whatever else,
mm-hmm.
or dealing with kinane. So just in general, that's how I prefer to run things. With
Yeah,
one one caveat, I'm sometimes more forgiving when there's a player who really wants to keep running headlong into combat, and I have to think like, okay, if you die chimerically, you're going to have to sit out like the next session and a half because you're going to not remember who you are for, let's check the chart, 4 weeks.
yeah.
So that's one area where I'll be a little more flexible.
Or it can be like, okay, you can play the game,
Oh yeah,
but
as a mortal that everyone's like on eggshells around. Yeah,
yeah. But if your mists are, if your banality is like 4 or 3, you still remember some things.
it's true. There's also the note in second edition, and I can't remember if it's spelled out quite as directly in C20, but that the mists occasionally part entirely in dreams, and you dream about your life in Arcadia. Like,
Hmm.
that's very clearly spelled out in second edition.
So
So,
here's a question for you,
mhm.
and this is a thing that I'm uncertain on how I would handle it. In the world of darkness, if somebody is dreaming, are they like essentially enchanted walking around in the dreaming, and then when they wake up they don't really remember their dreams very well because of the mists, and then you'd like use the banality chart to figure out how well they remember their dreams?
Whether or not to use the chart, I think, is a storyteller's personal choice. Whether or not
Yeah.
they're actually enchanted and walking around in the dreaming, I would say they occasionally might be, but generally not, which is part of why
Yeah.
oniromancy exists as an art.
Well, I don't mean in the wider dreaming, but like in their own little dream realm of their dream that
Oh,
oneiromancy
well,
deals with.
yeah. I would say those little dream realms are like the little bubbles floating through the dreaming.
Yeah, but that follows the rules of the dreaming kind of.
Yeah.
It does get weird. It's like high banality people never remember their dreams, which might not be a real world thing, but it still could work in the world of darkness as a fictional setting. Because
Yeah, it works.
yeah,
And their dreams are probably so boring. It's probably like, oh,
yeah.
glad I remembered to print out the top sheet on my tax forms.
Why does this dream realm have a banality rating of 7?
Yep.
That's not good.
So then, well, so anything else about the mists before maybe we should talk about how to get enchantment into your game?
Yeah, let's do enchantment.
Have you ever had like an enchanted mortal as a PC, either playing one or
Yes.
having one as an ST? Yeah.
Not me playing one, but that's a recommended way. And again, the C20 rules, we kind of mess with that. It's a technique in LARP
Mm.
that was
Oh, right.
first
Yeah.
brought
Yeah.
up actually for Vampire, where you just let somebody play a ghoul or something.
Yeah.
And it'd be, instead of playing Kinane, which is this whole other thing, right? It's like, okay, you're curious about this LARP. You don't know if you want to play it or not. you will play someone who's been enchanted by this other player character, and you're like a friend of theirs.
We talked about this with Pete Woodworth, didn't we, in our interview?
Yeah. So that's we've done that. So that's how
Hmm.
that's the only time it's come up. I've never had anybody play long term. I've never done that, but it's always been like a session or two. And then they come back with their like if they want to continue in the game. Sometimes they don't come back, and sometimes they come back with a new changeling character.
Sensible.
How about you?
No, I've never
Yeah.
run a game with them. I don't think I've probably had a kinane or two, but not regular mortal.
Oh, and I mean like there's been like enchanted like I've done crossovers so like enchanted mages and stuff, but that's not the same
Oh
thing.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean purely from a mortal perspective. But when I think about like how an enchanted mortal responds to what's happening around them, it's that spectrum from this is everything I dreamed, literally, to like
Hmm.
I'd really like to wake up now.
Oh yeah, I've done a lot of NPCs like that,
Yeah, oh
and
for sure.
I definitely do not play them as they're just the same person. Like they
No, no, no,
are
no.
usually freaked out, but occasionally super into what's happening. But either way, it's really intense and can sometimes create problems for the players, characters. But
I'd say for me, the important parts first, I think heightened emotion always has to be a
hmm
part of the equation. Maybe a sort of blithe acceptance of what's going on around them. Not necessarily that they like it, but that they accept the bizarre dream logic because it should
yeah,
feel like a dream, first and foremost.
yeah,
I'd also suggest that one of the reasons why mortals as why enchanted mortals might be useful in a story context is because of like moments of sudden inspiration or noticing things that might not be as apparent to the changelings who live a great portion of their lives among the dreams. So to someone who is truly a fish out of water, maybe they just like notice something that the players wouldn't, the changelings wouldn't. I think those are all like
hmm
ways I could see them functioning.
yeah. Or I can also use it as like a almost like an ironic commentary. Like yeah, you have somebody saying things that like the players have just sort of accepted as whatever or put on the side, and now they're saying things are like oh yeah, yeah, I didn't think about that, that's kind of messed up or something, or neat, or
That is one of the reasons I would say it's good it's good to enchant people. No, I mean I'll put that comment aside. No, but like from a story perspective, why enchant mortals or prodigals, I suppose. In
hmm
C20, there's another quote that I have here. The most important addition to a troop that an enchanted mortal character can provide is a human viewpoint. Even Kinane aren't fully human, and having a mortal point of view that's not soaked in banality can be the key for many a problem that might seem unsolvable to the more alien mindsets of changelings and their families. I
hmm
get that, but I have two issues with that. First, getting back to the idea of player and character bleed, I think it's hard for players to not have their characters also figure out solutions along mortal lines. That being said,
hmm
there are plenty of players who try to emphasize the alien nature of the Fae by making them as inhuman and monstrous as possible, and I don't think that really solves anything either.
hmm
It's just kind of overshooting in the other direction. So I don't know that introducing an enchanted mortal to fulfill that role is really helpful. But then the other thing that I have an issue with is it kind of undercuts the theme of balance and integration to me to say that changelings just aren't capable of imagining a mortal, non banal point of view. Because isn't that
yeah,
kind of their whole reason for existing? I think what
yeah,
it's worthwhile to have is, like you're saying, a mortal voice of reason that explains the impact on everyday mortal lives, almost like poking changelings in their mortal empathy a little bit.
yeah. I've used it similar to somebody who just went through the chrysalis too. I've
Yeah,
done it.
yeah, yeah. In War for the Oaks, there's a really good scene where the protagonist, Eddie, who's the enchanted mortal in this scenario, goes with her changeling friend to buy a motorcycle, and the guy charges them $800, and the puka who she's with hands the guy $800 bills. And as they're leaving, she's like, "Where did you get $800?" He's like, "Oh no, it's just leaves, and I just put a spell on them to make them look like $100 bills." And he's very proud of himself. And she's like, "Well, what's going to happen?" And he's like, "Oh, there'll be leaves tomorrow morning." And she's like, "Well, but okay, what if he gives one of those to his girlfriend to go buy groceries? And like, what if at the grocery store the till is short by $100 and that cashier gets fired?" And she kind of explains all the repercussions. And he's like, "Oh." So I think that
Yep.
kind of perspective, but I don't think it's useful to say like we need to enchant this mortal to figure out how to turn the duke back from being a frog. You know what I mean? And that I think is what groups lean more often towards when they do that.
I have seen we have to enchant this mortal to learn something. Like,
To learn how to not be dicks.
yeah, well, no, more like you could have practical things like, okay, there's no changelings who work in the finance industry or in this area, and
Fair.
we need a lawyer. Like, we don't have any lawyer. There's no alleles handy, right? So it's like we enchanted them to like get their help with something, and I think that too can, even if they wouldn't be able to help well enchanted, like wouldn't be able to do the thing, they could maybe explain things to you, and then
Yeah.
yeah, your tax accountants are always enchanted while they're doing your taxes. That's
Yeah. That points to, I think C20 doesn't specify that enough. In that quote I just said, where it says like a human viewpoint, that's so vague that it doesn't,
yeah.
you know, in the Enchanted, the book of the title, The Enchanted, they give kind of a list of different roles for enchanted mortals. And along the lines of what you just said, two of them are to build mortal connections or to create an unusual mentor. So it's like, we need
Mhm.
someone to teach us finance. Who do we get?
Yeah, actually, one thing I have seen from the very unsavory changeling types is enchanting someone whose hobby is a blacksmith to get some cold iron weapons. But
Ooh, very unsavory indeed.
yeah.
The Enchanted also suggests retinues, muses, and lovers as possible roles for
Hmm.
mortals, which all makes sense.
Muses, I'm always like, I had one ST do it, and it's like the kind of thing I kind of see, but even though mechanically the books maybe don't support it, is accidental rhapsody
Oh, for sure.
almost.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, dreamers, I mean, obviously is a role that they have. But none of those are like consultant or
Yeah.
mediator or there's an illustration in the enchantment chapter where it's this mortal kind of holding up their hands, keeping apart like a troll and a satyr who are about to come to blows. And I'm thinking
Hmm.
like that mortal's not going to last long.
Well, I'm just like, I'm pretty sure you could find a boggin who could do that too. Like,
Right, exactly. Yeah. What does the enchanted mortal bring that couldn't be filled by a non-enchanted mortal or a changeling? That's kind of the
mhm.
question that I think needs to be answered when figuring out how to integrate this into a game.
Yeah, and I think that's less. You could never, in theory, find one of the Kithane or something that could fill that role. But thinking about how many changelings there are in a population and stuff, there's still way more mortals.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Depending where you are too.
just because there could be a changeling that could do it doesn't mean there is a changeling and that they want to help you.
Well, or if you're stranded in a small rural town and there's
Hmm.
no other changelings, it's like,
Yeah.
well, got to get someone to help.
So my other question: what have you done with the whole like kind of more forceful enchantment? I know it's not really a C20 thing, but when you have like a banal mortal who's been forcefully enchanted.
Do you know, I'm struggling to remember an occasion where that's actually happened. And I don't know that it's ever because
Hmm.
calling upon the weird solves so many
Yeah,
problems.
that's true. I haven't done it it's never come up in C20. It's
Yeah.
come up in previous editions, but
It does make me wonder, though. Again, you probably have more werewolf knowledge than I do, but compared with something like the delirium,
yep.
because in werewolf, the delirium, depending on the mortal, they might react with anger when confronted with Garou stuff. So, like,
Hmm.
yeah, I think I'd probably hand wave it to some extent because you don't want to establish this person has banality or willpower or whatever, and then they get enchanted or they see a werewolf in this comparative case, and then you consult the chart and they react in a way that's totally at odds with what you need to happen.
Oh, I don't mean that, but like somebody's very angry at you. And I have seen, I don't know if I've done it when I'm running. I've definitely had it when it's playing. Like somebody enchanted an autumn person to try to get him to calm down.
Oh,
Well, they were very angry at the changelings around them. And that didn't go well. So
C20 suggests that a case like that could at least be an interesting story hook. I guess that's one phrase for it.
yeah, and I think the way that handled was she just started. She took the fact that everyone's now like blue and has horns and there's like red cap looking people and all that stuff completely in stride, but was still just as angry and banal and like. You were being completely irresponsible, and
That tracks though, because
yeah,
in that dream logic way, it's just like, oh, okay, this is the way things are now. Well, here's I'm gonna still give you a piece of my mind.
yep,
I mean, I could see that.
yeah. I'm going to speak to your manager, who's the Duke. I'm going to speak to your Duke. Like that's
In terms of flavor, I was thinking about how the feel of the mists and enchantment would change from character to character. And I think this is actually one of the instances where legacies are pretty helpful because,
hmm.
legacies are grounded in a changeling's self image and their self conceived role in society. So I like the idea of their dominant legacy defining how they feel about their memory loss or how they
Hmm.
choose to go about enchanting. So you have like Peacock, for example. If that character can't remember everything that happened in the dreaming, they're going to fill in the gaps in the most self aggrandizing way possible,
Oh, definitely.
which
Yeah,
their bumpkin motley mate might not. And
yeah.
similarly, if they're enchanting mortals, a peacock is going to do it to fill out their retinue, whereas a bumpkin is like, I just need to have an honest conversation with my lawyer. So seeming, yeah, I guess it would affect things, but it's a little more straightforward. Like a childling is going to be
Hmm.
a lot more cheerful about this than a grump would. But I was also thinking about Kith and how if like a red cap enchants someone with red cap glamour, that mortal might be a lot more ill at ease. They might have a much more unsettling dreamlike
Ah.
experience than a puka enchantment. We see hints of it come through, like hints of kith effects in the bestowments for the parted mists, because they seem pretty obviously pegged to like the 9 original kiths. But yeah, I think it's something that I like thinking about when I think about how this is actually deployed in a game.
Yeah, I've had a lot more on. I never thought of that. What you're talking about with the kith based who they're enchanting.
Mhm.
I've had it a lot more who's being enchanted.
A measure of both, for sure.
Yeah, coloring the glamour,
Yeah,
the resonance of it, if you will.
yeah. Oh, someday we're gonna have solid resonance mechanics. And all of this, I mean, a lot of it depends on the mood and themes you want to set for your game as well, too. So if you want a game that's all about mortals getting involved in the affairs of the Fae, don't worry so much about like nailing all the banality ratings and effects exactly. If your game is about things of the dreaming slipping away and it's all bittersweet, then really play up the mist effects. If you're running a game about the resurgence of glamour and how it reawakens the changeling's inner self, lean into that past live stuff and emphasizing the kid's nature. In any of those cases, I think, regardless of the mood, you have to establish consistency, consistent boundaries, and consistent rules of how things work. And that goes for the autumn world and the chimerical world and the dreaming proper. Those 3 layers of reality that the changelings are moving between. I guess if you're having like a deep dreaming quest, you can also kind of separate the layers of the dreaming, but that's a separate kind of issue.
Hmm. Yeah, the layers of the deep dreaming too. I've actually the mists can be helpful there
Yeah,
because the mechanics are so
wonky.
wonky. You could just be like, we'll just hand wave what happened. We'll just talk about what you remember and what the effects are now.
More
Uh,
augmen.
more, yeah,
Yeah, like I keep saying, it's one of the hand waviest. Yeah. But more enchantment, more
yep,
mists. I do think they get overlooked a lot, and
yep.
I wish people paid more attention to what they do.
Did we want to touch on any questions or comments?
We have one big question that I think we should tackle, which is from Terry Robinson, host of Mage of the Podcast. Go check it out on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience. So Terry asks, how should the mists interact with other night folk? It seems like magic, disciplines, rights, Arcanoi should help deal with it, but if Mind 2 to Nemesis is a get out of the mists free card, you lose something special.
Yep.
Big question. Do you want to handle this first?
Yeah, I think mind should help. Like the way I like it, I don't know what level of mind because I don't know what level of mind I like using for anything at this point. That's a mage problem, not a changeling problem. But I think something like lower your effective banality while the effect is in place by 1 per success or something.
Mm.
Just not having play tested that, that's
Sounds reasonable. I'd drive that car.
yeah, where you can do it, but like it's not easy to do it really effective. Like to like go from 10 to
Mm.
0 would be hard, very hard, right? I know with Hunter the Reckoning, I think when you spend your conviction, like fine, the mists are parted for you then, but as soon as your conviction's gone, they come back again.
Yeah.
Would make sense. And any sort of things like that, like it's the mists are omnipresent,
Yeah.
and the most you can do is act kind of like you're enchanted for a while you use your power. Or and even that should be like I said with mind, it shouldn't be just like you easily totally parted mists. Maybe like you have to go through a lot of effects, or you self enchant through some mechanism, and then you have other problems. So
Yeah. That's also putting aside the question of people saying things like, can you use mind to make somebody feel more boring, thereby raising their banality? Just like,
I'm like, you could. I think you should be able to use mind to raise or lower someone's banality, just like you can use mind to change anything else about the personality, and it should be just as hard.
yeah.
Like, I don't think a feeling should do it. It should be like, I mean, maybe you could do a temporary feeling, kind of like Gift of Pan does and stuff like that. But
Yeah. Well, so my take on it, I am going to kind of kick the can down the road a little bit. Bearing in mind the rule of whatever game is your point of reference should take primacy.
mm-hmm.
Even in a crossover game, I think you need to like establish what game is going to be the game that you refer back to. And for Mists, I think it should be Changeling.
Yeah.
I would say it depends on whether you see them as a mental assault, because when I think about what mind does, I think of it as it's preserving memory against influences that are like coming at it. And I don't know that the mists, as they're presented, are definitively said to be that. Because it's that metaphysical question of, are the mists something that clings to the minds that they cloud, or clings to the people whose minds they cloud, or do they issue from the changelings that they're meant to obscure? Which is a very subtle distinction, but becomes relevant for
Mm.
questions like this.
Oh, I don't think they come from the changeling. I think they come from the dreaming or something like
Well,
that.
yeah. Do they surround the changeling, or do they surround the people
Yeah.
that they influence, or both, or neither? I
Well, I mean,
mean,
there is the parted mist flaw that gets confusing, but
right. See, that's the thing, is that there's internal contradictions to the setting, and it's kind of left to the storyteller to
yeah,
decide for their game how it works.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I just think having it being always, it's an active thing that has to be. It's not like I don't think you could just use a temporary power to permanently remember a thing. That's the bit.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And for me, it's more about whether the glamorous actions of a fae, of a changeling, kind of penetrate into reality enough to leave an impression, to leave a memory on a meat brain. That to me is more relevant than, can the mage fortify their brain enough to remember everything?
Oh, that gets back. I mean, I know we got to listener questions. That actually brings back another question that I have about the mists.
Mm,
I'm just thinking about fighting, combat, whatever, because it's more straightforward example. It doesn't have to be this, right?
mm,
So you have a gun, you have a changeling with a gun, and they're shooting at somebody, and then they use a cantrip, and then they keep shooting, right?
yeah,
What's the mist? And they're doing somebody's got like banality 9 or something, right? They're gonna remember the. Are they gonna remember the shooting part?
for sure.
Okay, so it only covers up the cantrip. It only covers the weird, the face stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Well, unless they're like causing the gun to float to the left and keep firing on its own,
Yeah,
then they might, then they might just know that they were.
but they still might remember some shooting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but like, or if you like invoke the weird and you're still shooting your gun, is that?
Uh, I guess it comes down to how much you want to allow deduction to strengthen memory, or kind of
Mm-hmm.
strengthen those connections.
Yeah. Because I'm more thinking like, what is covered by the mists?
Right.
Basically, is it like everything that's happening at the moment, or just the fey bits? If you're enchanted, it's obvious you're just enchanted. But
Yeah. My general way of handling it is like, if you call upon the weird and you're doing mundane things mixed in, people are going to rationalize away based on whatever the end results are once the
mm-hmm.
weird calling has passed.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if they see the bullet holes or they have the wounds, they will assume I must have been shot. But if their banality is high enough, they just might have no idea who did or exactly when.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. There's so many of these kind of counter questions that we can keep kind of
yeah,
coming up
but
with.
being shot versus like claw marks from chimerical claws like that.
Well, but yeah, it's I must have run into a rabid dog and I just forgot or something.
Yeah.
That too is a story potential because then
Hmm.
other people who that mortal speaks to are going to have questions with a capital que.
Yeah.
So,
So you can't. So what you wouldn't allow someone to invoke the weird to get away with shoplifting.
uh, let me think on that. Coming back to Terry's question, though, um,
Yeah.
when it comes to mage in particular, I mean, I want to offer counter questions such as like, can mind overcome arcane?
Yeah.
You know, can mind combat the entire weight of the dreaming? Because that, in theory, is what's creating the mists as this byproduct.
Hmm.
Putting aside, let the story decide, I will point to the supplement How Do You Do That for Mage 20 says that for total recall of memories, you need time 2, mind 3. Now, that book is infamous for its sphere bloat. However, I like the idea of Mind 3, which allows dream walking, being the key to draw memories out of the mists.
Mm.
Because the memories in question are more like dreams that actually happened. And Mind 2, and
Yeah.
certainly not Mind 1, don't seem sufficient to me to cut through the mists to reach those.
Oh no, I agree. Like I was saying, that it's affecting yourself outside. If you actually read the mage book, it all seems to be mind one or mind five. And
I think Mind 3 with a healthy dose of meditation could probably do it for a mage,
yeah.
at least for reclaiming memories after the fact. In terms of other splats, I just kind of wanted to briefly call out in Vampire, you have Mythoceria, and Mythoceria 2 is Phase Sight, where you can perceive the chimerical. There's been discussion about whether or not that's the same as Enchantment. I want to flatly state that
Yeah.
it is not.
Well, it's the same as invoking the autumn for a fae.
Mm,
Mechanically, it works the same as that. It's immaterial to you, but you can perceive it.
yeah. So you might be able to perceive it in the moment, but it won't help you retain any memories any better or enter the dreaming or anything.
Yeah, I think you might be able to remember what you saw with Mysteria without the mists, but
But you would still be affected by whatever your banality is.
ah, I didn't think about that. Hmm.
In any case, I think it's a useful guideline for the other splats forms of sight,
Hmm.
such as, like you said, the hunters when they have conviction activated. Again, they're effectively enchanted for the scene, but once it's over, they're going to have the same haziness.
Yeah.
A weird one to think about too is chemistry, because like most Ravnos probably have no idea what their discipline actually does, which is pull
Yeah.
extrusions of the dreaming into the autumn world. So they'd probably be just as surprised as anyone else when their illusionary knife actually like puts a changeling into a coma.
Yeah. I think the illusion of chemistry, that part stays around. Like that's not affected by the mists. I wouldn't add mists to the chemistry effects
Right.
specifically.
Yeah, because they're basically calling on the weird with their discipline.
Yeah.
And if you have the level 4 power, which is permanence, you can just have it stay there until sunrise or whatever. But in
Yeah.
each of these cases, the dreaming should eventually reassert itself if you're operating from a changeling perspective. So if you have a Chiasid antagonist or a Ravnos antagonist, the dreaming eventually wins. If you're playing vampire and a changeling happens by and you have a Ravnos or a Chiasid PC, maybe you could flex things a little bit differently.
Yeah. I'm more leaning to like the chemistry in either game. The stated effects of chemistry in Vampire, not the crossover stuff with the Chimera. I wouldn't have the mists apply to that even in a Changeling game. Like it's a specific power that's doing it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if the Ravnos has high banality, they don't remember what power they're using.
Right. Yeah. It's
Or
things like that. Well, and it's one of those weird things where the discipline was created before Changeling existed and then
yeah,
got retconned.
but I think it could even make sense. Like having these limited. I mean, you say like, okay, the dreaming is you're going against the weight of the dreaming, but the dreaming's doing a lot of things at once. So
Yeah.
slipping through a little bit, I'm okay with. Like on your specific power overcomes that bit of thing. But
Yeah. And the bottom line is always that the effects of the mists and the way that enchantment works should be understood through the lens of the primary game that you're playing.
yeah,
And Mage, I think, has the most variability in that regard because you do have so many different types, different perspectives, different paradigms about how they would interact with that. I mean, technocrats,
hmm
I would love to do. Here's a story idea. Maybe I'll write this as like a fiction piece. Having someone who would have been a dreamer who ended up in the technocracy and keeps visiting the reality deviant who's like trapped in the basement because they keep getting their inspiration for technology or whatever reawakened, even though when they leave the basement, they can never remember exactly what those conversations were. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
The Shape of Water or something.
Yep.
I'd run that story. Anyway.
No, I'd even run the, you know, you have a crossover game and there's like a progenitor mad scientist who's made friends with a knocker or something,
Mm.
and then they're now getting in a lot of trouble with the technocracy, and now they're ex-technocracy and trying to get help from the changelings.
On the lam.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there are possibilities. I do think that each game has its fans who insist that their splat has to always kind of have the last word when it comes to these mechanical conflicts. And I think there's room for all of the above.
Yeah, and I think you don't even have to stick 100% to a game that's core for your game. I think you can. There's a lot of wiggle room, I think.
I feel like you do
Not
when
always,
there's a
but
mechanical conflict or when there's something
yeah,
that needs to be hashed out. I think you have to pick which game is going to take precedence, but it need not be the same game for every mechanic. I do
yeah,
think for a given mechanic, it needs to be the same every time within a chronicle for the sake of the players.
yeah. You got to keep your rules, but I mean, like if you're having the mists work a certain way in your crossover mage changeling game, that doesn't mean like you have to take the changeling perspective on the entire Umbra or something.
For sure, yeah. As long as everybody's aware of what the take is.
Yeah, as long as like the players know what to expect from the things their characters would know,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's consistent with. It's like, okay, if changelings generally believe this, even if your crossover is mage focused or werewolf focused or whatever, it should still not be ridiculous that changelings believe this. Same with
Mm-hmm.
mages, same with werewolves, same with whatever. But that's a whole other crossover question episode. Yeah. Is there anything else?
That is as much as I'm willing to say at this juncture,
Yeah.
or that people will remember.
Yeah. So you can find us at our website, changelingthepodcast.com. You can send us a toot, changelingpod at dice.camp. You can email us, podcast at changelingthepodcast.com. You can go to our Facebook page, Changeling the Podcast. Please join our Discord, discord.me/CTP. And we are YouTube. What's our YouTube?
It's just Changeling the Podcast.
All the links will be in our show notes.
Yes.
And I'm Josh.
You may or may not remember that I have been Puka.
And once again, I forgot.
Everyone, you're about to hear a public service announcement. And here's the public service announcement. Remember to always enchant responsibly, because the last thing the dreaming needs is a bunch of hot mess mortals running around making things miserable for themselves and others. Some helpful tips: never enchant on an empty stomach, never part the mists for anybody wearing last year's fashionable t-shirt, and always keep an eye on how many glamour-soaked tokens you've handed out. An enchantment journal can also be a helpful tool to keep track of all the people whose lives you've complicated this past week. We'd like to think that our episodes have enough oomph to tickle the glamorous fancies of our listeners, and we are tickled in turn by the support that you give. Topmost in those ranks are the patrons for our podcast, who include Derek, Dorcadas, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Sandchicker, Zija, Terry Robinson, and Tricerabeth. Sign up at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast if you'd like to get a shout out at the end of each episode, along with some other bennies. You can also help us out by leaving a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, or by tricking people into listening to our show. For now, it suffices to say, thanks bunches for your ears, and until the mists claim you, keep on dreaming.